welcome to today's episode of Talk on Things and Stuff. So we're going to try something a little bit different today. We're going to do a call-in show around a particular theme, which is, am I the ass? This is a Mormon audience sometimes, so I try to not use, but we'll say that this is in reference to a four-hooved mammal. At any rate, the question is, you start to notice, family gatherings tend to be a source of conflict anyway, when you get a bunch of diverse people with different perspectives. But then when people come together and they identify very closely with things in the political or religious realm, and then those discussions lead to clashes of ideas around a religion or politics in particular, then conflict tends to happen. And when you're dealing with a high demand religion like Mormonism and conflict like this takes place, things can get really, really intense. And so it's very common, if you are a member of, for example, the ex-Mormon subreddit, it's very common for people to post, hey, this happened in Thanksgiving. And then they go on to describe an argument. And for a support forum like ex-Mormonism, generally people will say, yeah, you were really done wrong. Your grandfather is a butt. They should never have responded to you to that. But there is a Reddit called Am I the A-hole? And the reason for that is that in these conflicts, a lot of the times you don't really have an outsider's perspective. Your perspective on the whole thing is colored by your own personal bias and the things that you feel very passionate about. And sometimes that can lead you to be less than charitable towards the motives, intentions, interpretations of people that you would otherwise love and be very compassionate towards. So if you read the Am I the A-hole Reddit, you'll see some examples where people are like, yeah, no, you were not the ass in that situation. People really were out to get you, or were, they were the ones who were offensive in that context. But there are certainly examples where, no, you were too brittle. You interpreted someone's actions or statements uncharitably. You didn't take the time to understand their perspective, to see where they were coming from. And that actually fomented the conflict. And so, and that's a situation where you can get many different perspectives on all different sides of the matter. So what I'm going to do today is open up the phone lines so that people can call in, but we're going to do something a little bit different too. And that is that I'm going to post in the comments a link. And if you are on a camera or a phone and you actually want to appear and share your story, with video and audio, then you can actually just click on this link and you'll enter the green room area of the show, and then I can add you to the conversation. So I'm going to do that now. If you look in the chat forum on either Facebook or YouTube, you will see a StreamYard link, and that will let you on your device join in the conversation. Just make sure there's nothing that is going to be embarrassing or doxing or otherwise. Now, a lot of the times, because you want to kind of get an honest answer in a situation like this, you want to remain anonymous and not really share your face or anything like that. So it's totally understandable if you would prefer to just call in, or if you use the link, you can actually turn your camera off, and that way we'll only get you by voice. But you can call 210-422-2222. Now, I want to talk a little bit before, while we're waiting for our first call, about cynicism. If you watched the Radio Free Mormon versus Midnight Mormons debate, there's one point where Cardinellis makes his concern. This is where they're talking about truth and where people deconstruct Mormonism and they leave Mormonism because they find that it doesn't measure up to their standard of truth. And Cardin concedes that point. He says truth is important. But then he says that the counterbalance to this is in your journey of deconstructing Mormonism. If you take that critical lens that you're using to deconstruct Mormonism, but then you go overboard with it and you developed a cynical worldview that looks for and reifies or believes is real the worst interpretation that you could of anybody's motives or statements, then it leads you to a very bleak place. And it is, something that has a very destructive effect on the social relationships that we all inhabit as we live our lives. And I think that's something that I've started to see more and more as a real factor, that when you leave the church and you start to understand the world around you, you really do have to balance that. And it may be even more of a point in the world of those people who are activists, who talk about the criticisms of the church online, because in your activism, in your search to try to tear down the false parts of the structure of the church that you believe betray people's agency, you can look for anything that will give you that gotcha moment, and the things that will get you more views, the things that will foster the more discussion, that will generate the more outrage, because that increases your footprint on social media or increases the number of eyeballs that are looking at you, because outrage sells. And being able to see something offensive brings more people, because there's like, people want to look at a fire, they want to look at a building being torn down. There's something fascinating and appealing about that. But in doing that, you can start to become uncharitable in the way that you conceptualize the institution or the people who are part of that institution. And so you may read more into them than is really justified. You may attribute more nefariousness to them than is justified, or you may say that they are occupying a mindset that they don't even understand that is uncharitable towards them. And that's a tendency that you really need to step back and say, is that really where I want to go? Because it can cause a breakdown in those relationships that are the most important in your life. So while we're waiting for anyone to join in, let's see what else we have. We have Logan that says, I wish I had a story so I could call. Well, if you had a story, it would mean that there was some terrible conflict in the middle of your holidays, and that's actually not that pleasant. And I'm just not, I'm not an authority on this in my own journey. I have had my own share of conflicts that, they tend to congregate around those holiday seasons. And it's kind of with that same missionary zeal that you go out and share the gospel. Once you leave the church, you kind of want to wake people up with it, and waking people up, sharing uncomfortable truths, uncomfortable facts, and your interpretation of those facts can be seen as threatening to people who are in the church. And so they will feel personally attacked by you sharing something, and they'll feel as though, even if your intention wasn't to hurt them, but to try to, shatter the hold that the church has on them, you're still going to hurt them because they identify so strongly with the church, and they'll feel personally attacked. And so then you have to deal with that fallout in your life. And I've committed the same. And I think the purpose of something like this, where I'm inviting you to share your own story, is really not to say that we're going to give you a definitive interpretation of who was right or wrong, but rather let's step back and just say, what are the different steps that you would want to take in the future when confronted with a similar situation, to make sure that you're not falling into a exaggerated form of cynicism that really leaves nobody any room for anything. Because, there's this quote from Bednar that ex-Mormons love to denigrate, which is that you have to choose to be offended, that to be offended is a choice. And there are two sides to looking at that quote. One of them is, the idea that, well, that means then that I can never be offended. It's wrong to ever be offended. And that leaves you very little room to set boundaries or to advocate for yourself in the face of something that is truly abusive. But there's another side of that, which is that you have a degree of control over how you frame the statements that are made to you in the context of a discussion. And if you approach statements made to you with that hyper exaggerated form of cynicism, then you're actually going to find things offensive that were not intended to be offensive, or that you could interpret in a more charitable way. And then, because you don't believe in Bednar's statement that you have to choose to be offended, then you will loudly proclaim your offense and feel somewhat justified and have a great deal of moral indignation about it, when if you take control of your ability to frame and contextualize and extend charity in the middle of those conversations, many times you wouldn't have to actually take offense. So like many things, it's not just, you have to take offense of everything or not one things, or you have no power to advocate for yourself or draw boundaries, but you just have to realize that your frame of mind has a lot to do with how those conversations go. And you do have a great deal of control over how you interpret and the motives you attribute to those things. So, all right, let's see here. Okay, Arthur says, my mom to my wife on Thursday, you really don't eat much for how big you are. We otherwise kept religion out of the conversation. That's a hard one to do. I don't know. There are times where you have to choose your battles and you have to choose what relationships have a priority and how far you want to go with. That is a really tough one. So I don't envy you in that position. Okay, Bubba Man and Kid says, I tried to keep going with all my new knowledge and tried to just take on the uplifting moments, but all I could do is listen, wait, and point out untruths, and only one thing would ruin my entire day. I think this points to something that probably affects a lot of us, and that is that when you get in the mode of pointing out the problems that do exist in the church, and in a sense, tearing down the church by pointing out these problems, we see that as we're just tearing down falsehoods and tearing down toxic ideas and the impact that they have in your lives. But what it ends up doing is sometimes you get stuck in a frame of mind where you're just looking for criticism all the time. You're looking for badness all the time. And it kind of wears on your soul. It wears on your mental state. It kind of gives you somewhat of a hopeless and dark outlook on life that then bleeds into what you try to do in your day-to-day times. And it doesn't happen all the time, and it's not always that important, and it's no reason to silence yourself when things, are legitimate causes for discussion. But just realize that you do need to take some breaks, and you kind of have to make a conscious decision to look for some positive things in your life and to celebrate those things and allow those things to wash over you and have the goodness that they can have. And this isn't to say that every ex-Mormon does it or that it's a widespread problem as much as it is. It's just something we all need to keep in mind as we go about our day. Okay. Oh, and that's kind of really what Thanksgiving is actually a beautiful example of. And there's nothing perfect in the world. And so when you look out at the things that you might express gratitude for, probably every single one of those things you could find some problem with. You could problematize it. But Thanksgiving is really just about looking for the good, looking for the things that you have benefited from, looking for the things that are really meaningful to you and verbalizing that. And having a gratitude mindset or a thankful mindset identifies those things that are worth preserving and those things that are worth fighting for and that you do want to maintain and pass on to the other loved ones in your life. And there's something really positive and uplifting about that. And so I think, it's entirely possible, and people are certainly going down this route where you just take Thanksgiving and you problematize Thanksgiving itself. And you say, well, this mythology about the Puritans feeding the Indians and inviting them to share, it's completely falsely historical, and America was founded on racism, colonialism, and there's nothing redeeming about it, and we just need to throw away the whole thing. Well, that is when you enter into that hypercritical mindset. Because you can acknowledge problems in history, but still find those things that are positive and uplifting and worth preserving and maintain those things. And then you're educated by the other side of all of, the dual nature of all of us and of history, and that there are things that are both terrible and there are things that are beautiful about it. Okay. I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is barking up a storm out there, so I'm sorry if that flows through. Okay, so again, I want to make sure we have that number up sometime. If you have a story to share, or if there's an event that happened, it doesn't necessarily have to be this year. It could be a conflict that happened in holidays past, or something that isn't tied to a particular holiday, but was just something where it's caused a disruption in your relationships, and you just kind of want to get it off your chest and get some other perspective on it. And it wouldn't necessarily be my perspective. I think taking comments from people who are viewing is also helpful in that regard. Okay, so let's see what else we have. At Thanksgiving game night, my aunt said we should all get the vaccine because the prophet himself said so. So naturally, that turned into an argument. Maybe I'll call in. That would be a great springboard for a discussion, John. If you do get a chance to call in, the number is 210-422-2222. Because, A lot of the times it's so tempting, and I fall into it myself too, when somebody who is in that mindset of the obedience morality framework that the church cultivates, and they say something like that, where they're advocating for something that's positive and good, but rather than justifying that position on the ground of its own merits or underlying moral or ethical principles, they ground its legitimacy in the authority of the church. So vaccines in this case are good because the prophet said so. And so, of course, you want to jump in and say, well, you're what if the prophet was against vaccines? Then you would want to do it. I would totally jump on that one. But choosing your moments can be important, and taking small victories when you're thinking about the life of your loved ones and allowing them to still hold whatever space it is that they hold can be an important skill to learn how to do as well. And heaven knows I'm not perfect on that one, but okay. Let's see what else we have. As a post-Mormon, I have experienced, I hope we can still be friends, to accusations that I am a Satan worshiper because I left, and people cutting ties despite the fact that I'm the exact same person before leaving. I think that's where the pain of separating yourself from such a tightly knit culture can really show itself, when you realize that a lot of the friendships that you had were so enmeshed in the church that when you go on a journey away from the church, then those friendships get left behind. And I think it can certainly, you can take a cynical view and say that these people have abandoned you, they cut you off, they only really wanted to be friends with you because of your membership in the church. And, there may be instances where that type of position is valid. I would probably venture to say that it's much more common for there to be a degree of social uncomfort where maybe they don't want or understand how to navigate a friendship outside of the paradigm of the church. And whatever reason, they think they may be saving you discomfort by not involving you in their life, when all they really have to talk about or want to talk about are things related to the church, and they're trying to save you that pain or discomfort. It's just, I think moving to a position of charity rather than cynicism is something that is hard to do when the direction you've taken on your life is through not really cynicism, but taking a critical examination of the foundation of what shaped your life beforehand. But, balancing positive aspects of cynicism where you at least allow yourself to consider the possibility that something, deception or whatever may be going on, to charity where, especially with the people that are most important in your life, you extend the benefit of the doubt in more cases than not. Okay. Bubba Man and Kid says, my spouse continues to go and serve in the calling, and now I feel it's a steal of time we should be spending as a family. If only it were true, I could continue and rationalize the eternal perspective. I think that the position that a lot of people have in mixed faith relationships can be really difficult, because it's very easy to see time spent doing church stuff as stolen time from authentic family existence. You could really, you could do what we all love to do, the church, and you could deconstruct that perspective and say, well, really, if you leave the church, anything that you engage in or do is going to be based on some assumption of what the best way to live is. And if you could find some way to exist with the church and get the benefit of all the positive aspects of the church, then you could do that. But really, it's a conversation, and everybody's going to give and take on that. I think what I want to promote, though, is the idea that we are not hapless victims to the church, in that we have power within ourselves to take control of the narrative as it intersects with our lives, and we don't necessarily have to interpret it or allow it to affect us in the worst way. And we can claim what is good about it and work with that. Because when you go out into the wider society, there's going to be aspects of wider society you're going to have to make that same negotiation with. And when your family remains in the church and is tied to that perspective, then that's a negotiation that you have the choice of making there. And you can make it worse than it needs to be by how you choose to take that up. So the concept of agency and being an agent and acting and not being acted upon even though we cringe when we hear Bednar say that, there are truths to it that are independent of religion that have a lot of implications for how you deal with conflicts, how you deal with trials in your own life. So I wouldn't discard that concept just because you discard other aspects of the church. Okay. Something my true believing mother said: animals know they are made to be eaten. They sacrifice themselves for us. Is that true, Yu-Gi-Oh? You lived in Korea. Would you sacrifice yourself for me? Oh, that's terrible. Don't say it. It's not true. I don't know what I would say if I was confronted by that. That's a tough one. I don't know. So that's so Christina Van Beek, that would be interesting to hear how you handled that, because I don't have all the right answers for that, and I would love to hear some other perspectives on it. Okay, again, that phone number is 210-422-2222. We're getting to the point now where we are 20 minutes into calling for calls, and if no one has called at this point, then we can certainly open it up to other subjects. If you just want to share your perspective on anything that has happened, then feel free to do that. But if there's anything having to do with family conflict in the context of holidays and being on a different side of an issue than family members who are in the church, then we'd certainly love to hear those stories. Okay. Let's see here. We have Sam Pinson saying, I feel uncomfortable with my extended family because after my apostasy, they gaslighted me about the church and my religious trauma, and they continue to support what I view as a fraudulent, harmful organization that directly harmed me. Am I the ass? That's the question. I don't know. See, call in, Sam, and talk about it. I think it's harder to address it as a one-sided thing. Okay, we got a call. Let's see who we got. Hello, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi.
Hey, what's on your mind?
This is John Baker in the comment about the ant playing the games and stuff.
Oh, yeah. Hey, John. Thanks for commenting. Yeah. Share a little bit about that story.
Yeah, absolutely. We were just sitting around, we have a big family. I live in Montana. And we had a big game night, and we were playing Dixit. I don't know if you've played that. But everybody in the family... Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Everybody in the family is, very LDS and things. That's my whole background. I served a mission, very into it for a long time, But essentially, just like I wrote in my comment there, during the thing, and everybody at the game activity, by the way, is very active. And so I was very apprehensive about saying anything, but you kind of already talked about it, but she had this perspective of kind of the vaccine came up, and I'm not going to share any, political things on that necessarily, but during that conversation, she was very adamant and vehemently saying, well, the prophet said so. You have to do it. That's what he said. And so eventually I just said something where I said, I won't say her name, but I was like, come up with one, Aunt Susie. I said, Aunt Susie, that means absolutely nothing. Like even in doctrine of the church, where you'll probably know this. Sorry. I said, you'll probably know this here. You, John Streeter, but I forget where it is, but it's where Joseph Smith goes up to Canada to sell the Book of Mormon or something, and he comes back.
To sell the copyright. He sends some people, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And when he comes back, the people are very baffled as to why it didn't work out, and that's where he gives that revelation of, it either comes from God, man, or Satan, correct?
Yes, some revelations are from God, some are from man, and some are from Satan.
Yeah, that's right. And so I shared that with her real quickly, and I told her, I said, well, even if the church is true, you have like a 67% chance that what the prophet said did not come from him. And so that's what devolved into a big argument. And, I guess I'm calling in because I kind of want to know, in your opinion, like, where is the line? Like, you know, like when you're at these family events and things and you're talking, is it like, because you want to have like a good relationship with your family,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, it's just so hard, man, to like, because now that I'm out, I just feel healthier and happier and calmer. I'm the same as I was before, but just better. And you want to help people out. And the only way to kind of do that, I think, is to tell the truth about things. But when you do that, it just, yeah, and so I guess I
Well,
just kind of want to know your thoughts on that.
yeah, I mean, it sounds to me from the description of what happened is that, someone in your family said, well, the prophet said we should do this, so we should do this. And it's over something that, I think most former Mormons right now would probably advocate for supporting vaccine science. And
Yeah.
There's certainly something to be said about how politics is interacting with the world of science and health, and how that, there may be many different sides of that discussion, but they don't detract from the realities that are manifest by the effect of the vaccine. At any rate, okay, but the conflict didn't happen necessarily because of that, because you then went into a different subject, which was this piece of history which shows the uncertain and infallible nature of things proclaimed to be a revelation from prophet.
Yeah.
And so I think the question of where our values are, which values are more important than others, and how that hierarchy of values drives our actions comes into play. And that can be a moving target as you go through your journey outside of Mormonism. Very early on, if you're like me, and it sounds like we have a lot in common in this regard, then truth becomes a very, very high value, because that was the thing that helped you to liberate yourself from things that you understood were harmful in your life. And so the truth of it becomes very important. And after a while, particularly if your family is really resistant to all of the conflicts that you and I, bring up in that pursuit of trying to hammer in this truth thing, is you'll realize that the relationships that you have with your family end up actually becoming even more important, because everybody's going to have their own perspective on many different things. And you, in your journey outside of Mormonism, may hold for a period of time some things to be true and highly important that later you reconsider and say there may be another way to conceptualize the nature of that truth, or it may not be as important as I once thought that it was, because there are other things that have a far greater impact. And so then what ends up happening is that hierarchy of value changes, and then relationship, I think, and particularly with your family, the ones who are most predisposed to be on your side or to care for you in your darkest moments, those things, and not everybody has the benefit of that, but those things for the most part are going to become more important. And so when you're faced with a situation like that, then you may reconsider and say, well, it's actually probably a positive thing in the long run if the sentiment that she's talking about, getting vaccinated because the prophet did, if more of the family acted on that just for their safety. And then I can make the point about the infallibility of prophets, maybe in a different context. That's not going to take away from the positive effects of that particular conversation. And so, it's kind of like the mirror image of Sun Tzu's art of war: never interrupt your enemy when they make a mistake. It's kind of like never interrupt your family and friends when they're doing the right thing for reasons that you may not agree with, but it's still the right thing.
Good point.
And so I think that's where you can look back on the event, look back on the conflict, and say, well, maybe I could have handled it a little bit of a different way. And you have the agency and the control over your own life to do that. The nice thing about a lot of these conflicts is that when we go through hardship and conflict with people who are close to us that we love, the reconciliation of that conflict many times is one of the bricks in making our relationship stronger and more authentic and more real. And the importance and power of apology, sincere apology, authentic apology, in doing that can't really be understated. And many times our pride gets in the way of those apologies and can be hard to do. And if you over time start to realize the power of that and your own ability to make pride be less of a factor in being willing to take the first step and try to heal that wound, it can actually make your relationship stronger. And if you do it, it softens the barriers that your family may have towards listening to you when you do go into rant mode in the future, hopefully not at a point that is so conflict laden. Anyway, so that's something that, I've tried. Certainly I have a long history about trying to demonstrate the power of apology. There was some research that I looked into before the apology on racism that I did to much controversy in 2018. I think it was on the NAACP thing. But there's studies that show that, taking the first step and initiating an apology, even if you see that you weren't the main one at fault, but just realizing there's power in reconciliation and softening relationships that comes from apology, and just being able to find some way to authentically take that step, it's really, really powerful. And so anyway, that's the only comments I have on that. Any other aspects that come to mind?
That was really helpful, by the way. Thank you. I haven't heard that, so thank you. On that one thing, probably not. I think you've pretty much covered it, so thank you. Thanks for all the work you do too. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for the call in.
Yeah.
All right. Take care, John. Bye. All right. Okay, we've got another call in. Hello, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Hello, Jonathan Streeter, Sam Pinson.
Hey, Sam Pinson.
Brother Brigham.
What are you up to, man?
Well, I posted not long ago about your topic today about the negative effects of religious trauma on family relationships. And so I have personal experience with that, and I recognize that not everybody responds the same way that I have. Not everybody's family circumstances are the same. Not everybody has their family treat them in the way that I've been treated. But at a high level, as I said in my comment there, when I shared my apostasy with my family, there was zero acknowledgement of the reality of anything that I was saying. There was
an example of that might be where you point out problems with the Book of Mormon, and they say, well, those aren't really problems, or what are some examples of where they don't acknowledge the reality? Or is it that you point out how something was harmful to you kind of on a metaphysical level or an emotional level, and then they say, well, that's not really harmful? Like what's an example of that?
Well, all of it. So on that point, it would be what I think we have all heard, like, I know you think you were lied to. I know you, without acknowledging that, no, I really was lied to. And you might treat that lie or respond to that lie in a different way than I have, but the lie was there. So that's one way. Another example would be the idea that the church teaches that you're supposed to follow the prophet, follow the prophet, follow the prophet, as if I grew up in some different church than they went to, where the message was, take what resonates with you and leave the rest behind. Like, I never got that message sitting in the pews in the LDS church.
Yeah, that was a particularly frustrating part of the debate between RFM and the Midnight Mormons, and listening to the Midnight Mormons in general, is that they seem to be involved in a church that's completely foreign to the one that you're describing, and that I lived in, where it really was follow the prophet and the church is your everything. Yeah.
So I think that I'm welcome at some level in the extended family circle if I am a muzzled dog. I'm not their terms seem to be, oh, yes, we love you, of course, because everything Mormons do is motivated by love. And you're welcome here, but we will have none of your perspective and your opinion and your questions and your information. And that just really rubs me the wrong way. I know there are people who can accept that. They don't want to make waves, and so they just keep their mouth shut. And I have not yet been able to embrace that, those terms.
Yeah, well, I can see a lot of myself in you too, because that's definitely I I had my own mini conflict over this holiday thing, and one of the things that was said was like, you're different a little bit now, John, than when you first were leaving the church. But when you were first leaving the church, it was like, no, you're right and everybody else is wrong, and we're gonna hear about it. And it was just really hard to deal with. And I reflected on that a little bit, and I could say there's some truth to that. And I think I'm better at navigating those things now, because I think, like, the perspective that I look at those family gatherings is like, okay, we all want to be here present as a family. We all want to love each other. And I think if you were to ask each member of your family, they would acknowledge that everybody's different. Everybody has their own priorities, their own values, their own ways of looking at and answering any particular question. And we love everybody in their individuality. I think at the level of those things, they would say that. And so then your question is, well, if that is true, why do I have to close off this entire side of myself in order to be there and present in the moment, in this circle of love that is supposed to exist? And it can feel really terrible in that way. How have you navigated it so far? Have you taken it upon yourself to get to that point and make the point by violating the unspoken social rules about what is acceptable conversation?
Well, I feel like there are conversations that I very, very much wanted to have coming out of the gate, so to speak, that I tried to have. I recognize that the initial reveal of, hey, guess what? I don't believe any of this anymore, was raw, and there was a little bit more emotion there than perhaps would be helpful. I've got a lot more experience now in talking about these things since then, so I could do a better job in talking about it now. But because, well, I feel like part of why that restriction was placed is because they had this false idea that that's the only thing that I would ever talk about forevermore. That's all I wanted to talk about. And that's just not true. But I was essentially never allowed to talk about it. So I guess it just kind of festered or has been an unresolved thing. But how have I navigated it? I have tried to have conversations with my parents on a few occasions about these issues, and there's no interest in understanding. I'm sure they think they're showing an interest in understanding me. My perspective is there's no interest in understanding. It's all, oh, we're so sad about the choices that you've made, and you're deceived. And so now where I have arrived...
Were you the golden boy before you apostatized, and now you're the black sheep?
Maybe. I think.
Are your siblings just relishing this? Yes, Sam, the golden boy, is now the black sheep, and I have risen in the count.
Well, I don't know that I would put it that way. I think it's probably more just absolute shock that, like, never would have expected this. How could, like, it's the fulfillment of prophecy. The elect shall fall, even the elect shall be deceived. So I feel like now I'm more at a place where maybe there's some level of acceptance that I'm hoping for what cannot be.
Mm.
What I want, like, if I could help my family members wake up, that would be fantastic. But what I want more than anything is for them to understand where, how I got here, like, and maybe they think that they know that, but I don't think they do, because we've never had the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've come to a place where I'm giving up on the idea that they will ever understand or even can understand. I don't know how a believing member could possibly understand the perspective of an apostate. I was a believing member, so I feel like I do understand their perspective. But until you're actually on the other side of the fence, like all the emotions that come with realizing that your life decisions were informed by lies and on, they just don't understand it and can't.
Yeah. I think what has helped me in those cases, because there are, at one level, there is always going to be this place that you've come to if you've come out of the church where you've looked very closely at the foundational things which justified all the stuff that you believed in, and then all of the secondary consequences of those beliefs. And there's going to be some aspect of your family dynamics and who your family are that continue to be informed by that. And drilling away at that foundation can have the secondary effect of damaging your relationships in a way that what you're pursuing is you're pursuing a form of validation that allows you to if you're like me, you still want to be seen as a good person who's still the same person, but has just come to a different place as a result of new knowledge, new information, new light, or whatever. But that validation is so important because you still want to be loved and respected by your family and seen as good, as a good person. Like, that's a big part of me in my own conversation with my family. And so what I've started to do is just say, okay, well, there's going to be some stuff that they're not going to listen to me on. Maybe they'll encounter it from some other place, and they're probably more likely to listen to it from some other place than from me because they don't want me to be right. But what I've started to say is, as I've started encountering people outside of religion in their own little context, and I've realized that there's something about when I was with the church, you have a security in finding that you're with a group of people that have shared beliefs, and those are different but related to shared values. And in the framework of faithfulness in the church, the values are legitimized and justified by the beliefs. And so the beliefs, which include all the foundational claims of the church, they include the stories from scriptures, old and new, they include the things that are brought out in general conference. That's kind of like the cloud of beliefs that then translate into the values that become incorporated into every church member's lives. And because in their mindset, those values are dependent upon the beliefs, then they're very closely intertwined. Now, I would wager that if you were to look back on your own journey out of the church, your beliefs have changed because you've confronted factual evidence that is conflicted, and you've reconciled them by letting go of beliefs that you now see were based on false things. But I would wager that if you were to look at what your values are, they really have not changed all that much. Things like love of family, fidelity, honesty, charity, like all of those things remain with you. They're just no longer tied to the beliefs. And so for me, if I want my family to see anything, it's that I still share those values. And so if I can shape my discussions with them on the common parts that we have on these values, and if I can reflect that in how I interact with them and what I do with them, then they actually find it very easy to connect with me and to still feel a great deal of that connection because I'm sharing the values with them. And those values, even though they're legitimized by a completely different approach, but the values still have that footprint on their lives. And so how then do I reflect the value of, I think family is very important, and I think the love that we share and the time that we spend together is a very important part of fostering that family. Well, I can make that value reflected in my relationship with my extended life by trying to focus on the good and positive aspects of those. And that may mean that I take those times that we do have together as a family. And rather than trying to get them to change the beliefs that justify the values that we share, I just say, let's enjoy and really lean into those values. And so that may mean, let's find some really fun thing that we enjoy to do when we are together as a family. And I'm focusing on the values that we share in common. And I'm trying to make that be the footprint that I leave in their life. And as I've started to shift a little bit more towards that, it does take you away from foundational minutia in church history and things like that, because I even look back and it's true in my life. Like, I grew up Mormon, right? And I didn't hear a lot of racist stuff taught. I was given a moral framework about racism that was very much the colorblind, we're all children of God and we should treat each other equally and everyone has equal respect in God. Now, even though I now see that there is a terribly dark and terrible racist history, right? The values that came to me, the ones that were selected and transmitted to me as a Mormon, were not white supremacist ones in that regard. And so when I can't look at Mormons and say you're all racists,
right?
Because the values that they're reflecting, even though there's that bad part of their history. And this is where I can relate to when Kwaku, like in the context of the RFM, says, you're going to go out there and you're going to find, no organization is completely sinless on the concept of race. Now, you and I can go into a great discussion about how the authority and legitimization of that authority, once it's been falsified by claiming these racist things to be the will of God, then it proves that they're not the will of God. And then that will bring us to a discussion of how all these things that come from that authority that shape the lives of Mormonism are completely baseless. And, that's all true, but that's not like the language that members are speaking as much when they live in their day-to-day lives, because if you can just live your life at the level of values and interact with your family at the level of those values, then you can preserve those things that are positive. And it's not easy to do. And it's not something that I think you can look at the compromises you have to make in order to do that and say, well, I'm not being my authentic self if I have to silence an entire half of my mind. But none of us say everything that is on our mind in any family context. Even when you go out with your secular organization groups and everything, you're not completely exploding. I mean, you're still conscious of what might be offensive to somebody else if you say it. You may be out at some sort of ex-Mormon meetup and you see like the swinger group over there and the polys over there. And you're just like, you may not agree with those things, but you're not going to go out of the way and tell them how their opinions about the nature of human relationships are doomed to statistical failure. So there's aspects of our beliefs and our identity in our lives that we always kind of keep to ourselves. And we try to find some way to connect with the people around us on ways that are, show our values. And for me, as much as honesty is a really important value, I've come to realize that there's a level that we interact with our family members on that is still real and still very important and can actually have a very positive effect if I focus on it and build it up, build those aspects of connection and love, and realize that that the compromises that I make don't necessarily invalidate the importance of those relationships or the nature of those relationships. And I just kind of have to change. It's I hate to give Bednar a win on this, but I can change what offends me. Just as much as Mormons have changed what offends them. It didn't offend them before that they used the word Mormon, but now it offends them. And so your ability to reframe what is offensive to you, what compromises you make. And a lot of it comes with the realization that we all make compromises in every relationship. And we just have to prioritize which ones we're willing to make and which ones we're not. And, I acknowledge that, in this discussion and doing this, some people may say, well, you're just giving excuses for people to put up with abuse. And that's where each of us have to determine how we define abuse and what we consider to be abuse, and realize that we do have the power to act in self-preservation, to draw boundaries, and to give ourselves space. And that's an ongoing conversation. And it should be that our framework in doing that is to maintain our own autonomy, our own dignity, and our own strength. And that eventually is going to get to the point where you can re-enter some spaces that you weren't able to do that before. And you're able to find a healthier way to navigate those things as we grow. But what I don't want it to turn into is that we are always at the whims of what we may interpret to be offensive and abusive, and that we have no power to reframe those things and to reclaim the values that are important in our lives. And in doing that, be somewhat charitable over the control that we try to exert in other people's lives. Because, I mean, when I was really trying to get my family to see the racism, the sexism, all these other things, like I would give these perspectives and they need to understand and adopt and internalize these perspectives. And to some extent, I'm trying to control them. I'm not trying to control them, I'm trying to persuade them. But when I wouldn't back off, the distance and the gap there became the big wedge in our relationship. And I can't control how they respond and how they change over time, but I can control how I change. And so when I stopped making that be the most important thing, and I started making the other values take priority in how I interacted with them, then I was able to exist with them where we didn't share the same beliefs, but most of their values were the same. And it's those values that actually gave me meaning and purpose and joy and love in life. And so I'm trying to shift more in that direction. And it's been a little bit easier. And that's not to say that I don't say things. Like, I still say things. I just don't try to get them to accept what I say for the reasons that I say it, because everyone's going to have their own way to reframe these things. As much as I'm trying to reframe these things, they're trying to reframe, the troubled history of Mormonism in a way that allows them to keep what is still important to them. Anyway, that's just one perspective. It's not the right perspective. It's just something that I have found helpful. And I just want to make sure that I've talked about it so that if it is helpful to other people, then they can at least, they don't have to take it whole themselves, but it is just another way to approach these things. Anyway, I talked a lot. I want to give you a chance to share a little bit more if there's anything comes to mind.
So we talked about the desire to be understood, and that is an aspect of this, excuse me, an aspect of the relationship that is troubled right now.
Yeah.
And as I said, like, I've moved away from the need for that understanding, I think, a lot. Beyond, and then there's also the desire to share the truth. So giving up the desire to share the truth with them or persuade them, giving up the need to be understood or the desire to be understood. There's also the reality, at least for me, and the way that I'm framing things right now. My participation in extended family activities and discussions would be like returning, it feels to me like returning into the circle of abusers. Where people are participating in rituals of an abusive organization and they're extolling it, like they're speaking it up. So even if I keep my mouth shut, and even if I'm like not trying or not worrying about being understood, that's another aspect for me of I feel uncomfortable with that. And it's not just that I can only find myself in the company of people who completely agree with me. It's not that. I can go socialize with Catholics. I was not directly traumatized and wronged by Catholicism and on, but I was by Mormons, and my Mormon family participated in my indoctrination and all of the experiences, or many of the experiences that I had with that. And so there was an association there that doesn't exist in other religious groups or ideological groups that vary from my own. So your thought on that is reframe it. So like disassociate.
Well, I mean, like you've described really well how, like, you can hang out with Catholics and not feel any of the anxiety, any of the trauma or emotional abusive triggers or anything because you weren't abused by that particular organization, but at the same time, I bet that you could say that that organization was just as, if not more, abusive in its history and in the problems that it has. And so that should at least give you something to reflect about. There's something very personal and meaningful in your life about why it is you still feel this way about socializing and hanging around with Mormons. And it's something much more than the nature of the organization itself, because the nature of the Catholic organization doesn't make you respond that same way. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think that may,
personal experience.
Yeah. And that may speak a lot to where people talk about the reality of PTSD and religious trauma. And the thing, when you talk about how people characterize PTSD, where people who come out of war zones and then find that there are certain things that immediately ignite those emotional triggers and make them experience it all over again, what's happening is that they are responding reflexively to minor stimuli that should not actually realistically give them that response. And so the hurt and the harm that they are feeling is because their response is not calibrated to the level of threat, and it's colored by how their brains were rewired in surviving the trauma that they originally survived. And it's not a unchangeable state of affairs. It's something that there are evidence-based methods to get people to start to recalibrate those responses. And it's a process. They'll start off much more sensitive than where they end up as they go through that therapeutic process. And I think if you're going to apply the PTSD paradigm to what we experience coming out of this religion, then I think you can also say that there's a trajectory to it. The question is just like, what are we doing? Because the thing then that really needs to change is not so much that you need to change your family members or that you need to change the church. It's that you need to work on yourself, and you need to figure out what it is about you that causes you to have that sensitivity, and see if there's anything that can be done about that, so that you can get to the point perhaps where you may be able to be as comfortable with family members who are still active Mormons as you are with Catholics. Because the thing that's different is inside of you. And that's where, when we focus only on the problems of the church, you're surrendering a bit of your agency and your responsibility of doing that internal type of work. And that doesn't mean that those problems don't exist, but it just, you could even look at it and say, I'm going to be better at navigating those relationships with my family if I can somehow work on what it is that causes me to have this hypersensitive reaction to it. And I mean, you're not alone. Like I have been in that situation and I still experience it. I do acknowledge that it's less so now than in the past, but I haven't seen a therapist specifically about these things. I've just kind of tried to spend a lot of time looking at a bunch of different perspectives and being open to changing how I frame things. And a lot of it has been, I don't know, maybe reading about cognitive behavioral therapy and seeing some of those distorted ways that our mind tends to reflexively turn to, and then saying, well, they're talking about these things happening in a non-religious context, but are these things happening in the way that I respond to when my family talks about the church or anything? And I found that there are some of those things that I benefited from thinking about. And so I guess to me, that's one way of considering these things, and it's always the balance. I think there's some comments, particularly where Up Where the Sun Don't Shine, the commenter, if you read the comments in there, she's pointing out correctly that there are family situations that are abusive, and where even you're not trying to force truth down their throat from your perspective, but they are trying to either use guilt or shame or shunning to try to change you according to their worldview. And, in trying to reframe these things and take more control and power over your own internal work, that doesn't mean that you have to forego the concept of boundaries. What I would suggest is that as you are doing that internal work, you are becoming stronger, you are becoming more capable of dealing with these fraught situations, and that eventually you may be able to re-enter some of those family situations and find that you have changed and they have changed. I know my family right now is way easier to talk about issues regarding LGBT people than when I started my journey. And that's because they've changed on their end, independent of anything that I've done. And so for me, family is an ongoing conversation, and it does involve a lot of me working on my own stuff and trying to adjust, and it results in adjusting my expectations for them, and trying to get them to play Yu-Gi-Oh, because I'm just trying to find more and more things that I can connect with them to focus on the values that I do share with them, and on the love and the time we spend together and all the good things that are not theology enough. All the theology stuff and everything is just kind of like for me, is trying to foster an environment where we can have the experience of, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans, that type of thing.
I appreciate your perspective.
All right, Sam, I know you're in a tough spot. I've seen some of your posts online, and you probably got a lot more challenges than I do on the family front.
Well, I hope that people haven't perceived my post and my call in here as, I don't know, call for help or like woe is me. I think
frankly, you're articulating. Yeah, you're talking about things that you see again and again in the journey outside of Mormonism when family remains, and you have to navigate that. So it's kind of a universal dilemma.
Yeah. Well, I guess another thought that I have in this regard is, within the framework of Mormonism, you're duty bound to have a good relationship with your biological family members. Like you're stuck with each other forever. And so by golly, if you have an abusive parent or sibling, you've got to endure and just make that relationship work. And so while my core values did not change in leaving Mormonism, I don't feel that sense of obligation. Like if a relationship is not healthy and not working for me, I'm entirely okay with letting go of it, or reframing it, or shrinking it, or whatever needs to happen to allow it to, I guess, serve me, to work well for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is a muscle that you have to learn to flex when you leave Mormonism. And, there's the danger of just going too far right at the beginning, just you're not accepting me, and cut off all conversation. And if I had done that early on with how I was received initially in my family, I feel like I would have missed out on the growth that they experienced as a result of my leaving, even though that growth was not a linear thing. In many cases, I see it as kind of an up and down thing. But that's just, that's my assessment of their growth. So that's all subjective anyway. And so it sounds like you're approaching it you have to have that on your menu of things that you can do to maintain your own sanity and your own, mental health, is being able to draw boundaries. They don't have to be hard boundaries. They can be soft boundaries. And in some cases, they are boundaries that you may draw with yourself. And just in terms of, there's some topics that you're going to wait for a sign from somebody in your family that they're open to talking about it. It doesn't mean that you've closed yourself and you have to silence yourself, but it's an acknowledgement that some people are only ready to listen to some things when they get to that certain point. And, the Buddhists have said, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Well, you may be the teacher that appears when someone is ready, when they've mentioned something. And being willing to be okay with that can be hard, because you feel like you have to close off part of yourself until that time. But particularly if you've already been burned by how those conflicts go, that can be an act of self-preservation and of relationship preservation. And seeing that all these things are negotiations we make with people around us at least helps you not only see it as you having to silence yourself and cut off part of yourself. And there may be aspects of their life that they would otherwise normally want to share with you, but they feel they have to silence that part of their life because they understand that it wouldn't mean the same thing to you that it means to them.
Sure. And I appreciate that point, that any boundaries that I have set or positions or attitudes that I hold right now are not immutable, and I can change my mind depending on new information and evolving circumstances.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate the call, Sam. I always enjoy hearing your insights.
Thank you so much for your thoughts.
All right.
And
Take care.
Thanks for your show. Take care.
Right.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, let's see here. We've got another call. Hello, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff. What do you got for us?
Hi, Jonathan. My name is Paula. I am a relatively new listener to you, but I guess I just wanted to, give hope to people who have struggled with their family. I just spent Thanksgiving with my family after, a few years of estrangement. We're finally getting back together. And it got really bad right after my faith crisis kind of hit. It got to the point where at one family gathering, I was expressing my just deep pain over the church and what I felt they had done to me. I was in the midst of a divorce at the time as well. And my dad at the time, actually, we were kind of getting into it, fighting, escalating, and he pulled out a gun and he pointed it at me. And kind of did the, motion of like a kickback or whatever, and pointed it at his own head. And for years after that, we were estranged. I received an email later that basically said, "You're no longer welcome in our home if you're going to come and discuss your feelings and ideas." And eventually it got to the point where I'm closer to my family than ever. I am attempting to start a podcast with my dad talking about the Come Follow Me curriculum, where we talk about things like, you pointed this gun at me. How did you feel during that? And he talked about how scared he was. And he talked about how frightened he was because he didn't know how to react to this person who was hurting and he didn't know how to help, So we're trying to open up the dialogue. And I guess I feel like the most beneficial thing for me, I think, was allowing for some sort of separation. And like you were talking with Sam about, really realizing that this is religious trauma and processing it as trauma in an appropriate context. I don't think that eventually I felt like I had to, sorry to info dump on you, it's my ADHD. I felt like one of the best things for me was being forced to remove myself from that situation and no longer seek validation from the people who had harmed me. Work on my trauma on the back end, do the cognitive behavioral stuff, do the somatic therapy stuff, because it's all lodged in the body. And then going back to the family, feeling like when I go over to their house now, I don't feel like I have to cut off parts of myself to fit through the door. I don't feel like I'm hiding anything. I feel like I can show up as my whole self, and it's not painful at all. So there is hope. There is hope, and I think that there's benefits to the boundaries and the, no contact or allowing yourself to take a step away. Yeah. I mean, Jesus said, hate your family, and then, kind of you'll catch the family on the flip side. And I feel like that's kind of true. Like you got to kind of cut off things, work through your stuff, and catch them once you're a little bit more healed.
I got a couple of questions on that. Number one, when you went back after doing a lot of that internal work, did you feel like the difference was that your family was a different person, or did you feel like you were in a different place in those contexts more than they had changed? Or was it a bit of both?
At first, I felt like it was just me that had done the changing. So I feel like I was able to engage with them in a way where I wasn't being triggered. I had gotten to the point where I saw them almost as, you know, if you're in an abusive system, you're both victim and abuser. And so being able to see them as both and have compassion for the complexity of them really helped. And then I think a few years after I kind of re-engaged with them, I was able to see, oh, they have changed. I don't think 5 years ago my dad would even be able to like talk about the gun incident at all, much less admit how vulnerable my own faith crisis made him. And so I think he's done a lot of processing as well. I mean, he's still to the point where, and you know, you can watch it on my little podcast. I'll put a link in the chat, but like he'll still say to me directly, like, I just wish you would come back to believing the same way. Or like he still thinks he's right and that the church is still true. Yeah. But he at least feels like there's this point in the podcast where, you know, he's just crying and saying like, I'm so glad we're doing this because it helps me know what you went through and how I can like essentially not repeat the same mistakes with my grandchildren. So he has done a lot of work and he has expressed sorrow and regret and forgiveness on, and I've expressed the same to him with regard to how I was acting as well. So definitely both.
Wow. And that brings into the second question is, you know, when you first mentioned the gun and putting it to his head, like that's one of those instances where I think most people would say, okay, well, that's too far. That's unsafe. You need to draw boundaries, get out of that thing. And it's really hard to be charitable to the man who did that initially. But you being able to then years later talk about it and unpack it and for him to show the vulnerability of admitting that he did that, but then also kind of to give him side of what he was thinking at that time and how he has changed. That's kind of like one of those extreme points where if people could understand that, then maybe dealing with less extreme issues in their lives might be easier and give people hope to some extent. But I really like hearing that a lot of the big change was really you having to look inside yourself and work on kind of those internal religious trauma repercussions in your own life and in your own thought processes.
Yeah. And I would also just add that that was a very extreme situation with my dad in the sense that it wasn't an abusive family. It wasn't outright like domestic violence within the home. It was to the point where the anger was almost suppressed. So to see that anger within him, there was an immediate recognition of how it was laced with this fear because it was so unusual for him. It was like the mask fell and he could no longer be the nice priesthood holder anymore. And so it was very, very rare. So I would say that because it was more of this is scary, and obviously we're cutting off contact for a while because this isn't cool. It was also that I think I was able to see the vulnerability because it was so rare for him to do that, and it wasn't common for him to, you know, to let things slip and let his fear show and let his anger show. So yeah, I would not definitely, I'm looking at Up Where the Sun Don't Shine comment, and I'm basically saying I'm not advising people to, you know, kind of re-engage or whatever. I'm just saying that this, I think it was a very rare situation where this happened and it just, his mask slipped, and it was almost like it didn't, in the moment, it didn't feel as abusive as it sounds. It felt, I saw a broken man in front of me, and I realized that we needed to kind of cut things off because this couldn't keep escalating like this. So yeah, I definitely, would not, it's an exceptional circumstance that I would not kind of tell anyone to kind of re-engage in the same way I did. I mean, it was years before I re-engaged, but.
Yeah, well, you used a word about your experience before you had that period of separation, which was triggered. And that's a common word that we hear a lot now about things that trigger people. And sometimes when the trigger is invoked, it's invoked to say that everybody around me in the conversation or in the context needs to now modify their behavior to accommodate the trauma that I have inside of me. And that is a paradigm that doesn't really have the effect of healing the trauma inside of someone. I think there's a great sensitivity to triggers right now, because what we're trying to do is help people that are working through these traumas not get to a point that is beyond where they are in their internal work, in their internal therapeutic work. Because part of that, when you talk to people that deal with PTSD, exposure therapy is something that is beneficial in treating that, which means that you give yourself exposure to small, manageable amounts of the thing that initiates your trauma response, and you build confidence and strength in working through those emotions, what causes them, understanding that better and diffusing them for the future. And you do that incrementally until you're able to get up to normal social interactions that that are manageable. And so I think there's, the reason that we hear so many trigger warnings is because you want people to be able to modulate their own exposure to where they are in that process. But at all points, it points to you having to kind of do that internal work. And I think that's where I want to make sure that the conversation goes, which your story is a good example of, is that distance gave you the space and the time to do that type of internal work. And that's the thing that it appears to have made the most powerful difference in how you were able to move forward eventually. So I thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yes, of course. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you later, Jonathan. Bye.
All right. Take care. All right. Let's see here. We are at just an hour. And again, if you want to call in and share your own experiences with any family traumas that have happened or family conflicts that have happened over the holidays or having to do with the holidays, it is 210-422-2222. Let's see what other comments that we have. Let's see. Up Where the Sun Don't Shine says, Mormon dogma doesn't allow for non-believers to have any credibility in leaving the only true church directed by God. Who argues with God? Most Mormons will never see any arguments for leaving with any degree of value. I think that there are a lot of members for whom that is very, very true. And it's kind of like John Dehlin has this famous quote of, like, one of the things about a high demand religion is they never let anyone to leave with their dignity intact, which is another way of saying there's never any good reason to leave a fundamentalist high demand religion. And that's expressed in that, if you ask members of the church, well, what's a good reason to leave the church? They'll be like, well, it's the true church. It's God's family. So why would you leave it? And I think a lot of believing Mormons may start out in that position. It's not universal. I think there are other Mormons who say, the church doesn't fit for everyone. And I don't understand it, but I have faith that God has a plan for it. So if you decide to leave, I still see you as a good person. And I don't feel it incumbent upon me to change you or to convince you, but I can still love and accept you. And certain members of my family have kind of gotten to that point, and it was very healing, but that was something that they had to come to on their own. All right, we got a call. Hello, you are on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Hey, Jonathan Streeter, Gimpy Geezer here.
Gimpy Geezer, how are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Hey, I'd like to weigh in on a few things, and I've got a few questions to ask if you don't mind.
Sure.
And in my addled mind, they do tie together with the topic in a way. I think I know what you're shooting for with the am I the a-hole in the holiday situations, but I think that does extend to other situations. I'm thinking about I just got a couple comments. Is it okay if I kind of roll some of this out?
Oh yeah, no problem.
It's my communication style. I'm gonna throw out some bits of information and tie them together in a nice little bow for you, John. That's what I'm gonna do.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So I joined the church at age 20, so I have experience before then, just life experience, and I was fortunate enough to be raised in a family that had, good moral values, not too much religion, but okay. So I joined the church, and what's interesting is you're talking about talking to family. A church is going to come up in these, like you say, the holiday situations and other situations. Mine didn't have over the holiday, but when I joined, I was, so excited, that golden convert. I even went on a mission a few years later, John. I really bought it hook, line, and sinker. But obviously, if you want your family to be together and love your family as I did, you tell them all about it. And what I found interesting is even my own family who loves me, not even, friends or people that are members or non-members now, whatever, even in my own family who does love me, they didn't want to hear about the church it's been about 40 years ago. Yeah, 40-something years ago. They didn't want to hear about it then. And on my way out, I've been out over 2 years now. We're going on 3. They don't want to hear about it now either. So nobody wants to hear about it. So I imagine when you go, and what I've heard a recurring theme is people are sharing things on the ex-Mormon communities and podcasts and stuff. A recurring theme I've noticed is they almost in puzzlement. The people say they don't even ask me why I left. They're not even interested. These are people, maybe friends or family that you love. They don't even want to know why. So it's like talking does, what good does it do? And I think that I'm thinking of the term pressure applied. So if you go to a family situation and they're talking churches, so let's say you're not a member, but your family is, and you go for our holidays, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. So you're going to eat. Where's the pressure going to come from? Is it like if they say, hey, would you give the prayer even though they know you left? I don't know. You have to do. But it's more pressure if you get into church talk or they say this or that, the other, and then that is not correct. But what are you going to do? You're going to bite your tongue or whatever. So that's pressure. Or if you go in, like if I had, how when you leave the church they say, oh, you've lost your countenance, you've lost the light. Yeah, I think my personal opinion is because when you first come out, you're in that stage of coming out and you're not happy about it. Yeah, your countenance is different. What if you left an abuse? What if you're a woman and you left an abusive relationship where your husband beat the crap out of you and you finally got out? And after you healed up and everything, people don't want to hear you talk about it, and they say, "Oh, you've lost your countenance. You used to be so much more cheerful." Oh, breaking away from a toxic relationship and everything, and trying to heal myself and grow. Yeah, it did take a toll on me. Give me a little more time to work that out. And I think also not only if you go to a situation or whatever with you got that church pressure. A lot of times they'll say the pity eyes. I've met former members that I love to this day, in the public or the store or something, and they kind of look at you sad because I know they're looking at me, they're judging me, but not maliciously, but through the Mormon filter. So they're looking at me with those sad pity eyes. Oh,
I call it the frown smile. Is the perfect word for it.
Yeah, the frown smile. But maybe a little glisten in the eye. And what they don't realize is that I'm trying very, very hard not to give the same look to them. See, there's irony. There's irony there. So I think it's pressure applied. Or if I came in, after I joined, even when I was going through a great turmoil after I left, and during that process and everything, the dark night of the soul, I would talk to trusted friends in the church and stuff, and they don't want to hear it either, So, but pressure was applied by me. They're uncomfortable, they're indoctrinated in it, As I stood among them. I have no reason to judge them because I understand. Yeah, I feel like I'm continually being judged. And also, I can, in my experience here, like I'm currently going through we're going through some, pretty tough challenges, and I can't help but feel that the people that we know, they kind of look at us like, well, yeah, you left the church, so yeah, of course things are going to be bad. It's like, no, honey, we're dealing with stuff we've been dealing with even as members. It's all, it's so when you go to a family event, are you going to apply pressure about the church? They don't want to hear it. Are they going to apply pressure to you? And if you got kids involved, God help you. They're going to take them, and it's time for the kids' baptism. So I think if any stories come up of conflict, it's because, the disagreements and everything. I know there are rare exceptions where people, well, if you left the church and your family's still active, or some of your members are your family active, they're good and loving and actually do the principles that Jesus taught type thing. You just love in spite of love with no conditions. Anyway, so when I joined, my dad, he's been dead almost 20 years, but we were real close. So after I joined and stuff, we would go for family gatherings and stuff, and he'd always offer, he said, hey, would anybody like a drink? You kids, you want a soda? Got here, you want a beer over here? Because, people drink alcohol in my family, and it's just not a big deal. But he'd always say to me, hey, do you want a beer? And I'm like, Dad, I don't want a beer. Get out of here. But he did it like all the damn time. And at first I was a little annoyed by it. And then I kind of laughed about it. And now, and I drink on occasion. I don't drink that much, but every time his birthday comes around, I have a beer. Because I know that he would be so relieved that I was out of this, because he was always that. So I even had the same pressure. If you could look at it from a different way, while I was a member, I'm the only member of my family. So I've got brother, sister, mom, dad. So they don't want to hear about the church stuff, but they would ask me some questions, maybe because they were concerned about this or that. But the reason it worked is because we just genuinely love each other. We had a good history. Thank God I wasn't raised in it. So I have I think that's more of an advantage for me. But we always got along, and just the love and the joy, like the things you were talking about. I've been listening to this, and I've prompted a lot of things, but the love and the joy of being together, if you could focus on that, that's what's going to make it work. But if you've got somebody overbearing or something, or like, Jesus Christ, a poor girl had her dad put a gun to her head, that's some serious drama. But doesn't it apply to pressure coming from either way? And that leads me to my next thing, but I'd like to hear what you got to say about my jabbering so far.
Oh, no, you said a lot of good stuff there that I think is a part of, what we all have to confront when we come out of this. The insight and realizing that, like, hey, if every family gathering, I'm hammering away on what a crappy guy Brigham Young was, like, I probably would get sick of it if at every family gathering they were hammering away on, me or whatever. And it's just kind of like, can we draw a truce where we just talk about the things that are going on in our lives that are positive and not the past of the church? If you're able to do that, would be great. Now the thing is, when Mormons get together, they talk about the church because the church is their life. And I think it was a lot easier for me in those situations when I started to just try to just find the positive things that a family member has experienced as a result of the church, acknowledging that the church does have some positive stuff that happens in people's lives, and allow them to share the positive stuff. Because for the most part, they weren't hammering me with the negative stuff. The negative stuff was based on, just how I saw certain aspects of my life based on what the religion had shaped for me. So, again, it comes back again and again to you being able to exert some control internally about how you respond to, how you frame or reframe things that happen to you, giving you a degree of control over how you see interactions take place. And all that is not to say that you have to submit to and endure abuse, but it allows you not to see everything as abuse, and to understand that some things that are said are cultural and they're not meant as harmful, and intention does play a role in it. And if things that aren't directly harmful, when you can unplug intention from effect and realize that you don't have to feel the effect if the intention is not there. Certainly in cases of physical violence, that doesn't apply, but there are other ways to reframe these other things. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think of, if somebody who is like a true, active in the church or whatever religion, Jehovah's Witnesses, whatever, they really, it's part of, like you said, and it's part of so much a part of their identity. And you're so indoctrinated. An example that came to my mind was, I forget who said, a prophet can't lead you astray. They said it a couple times. So, what? I can't lead you astray. The prophet says, I can't lead you astray. The Lord wouldn't allow it. Well, who said that? That goes back, several prophets ago. That's who said it. So he's a prophet. Is that valid? Well, that goes back to Joseph Smith, and then you're back to Joseph Smith. So you know what I mean? It kind of all goes back to the roots. But you, it just, I lost it there. I really had a point on this, but you're walking. It's like you always got to walk on eggshells, and you always got to be careful, because if they feel that way, you can't fight feelings. And I don't know what you want to call love, but I think a lot of people would equate love with feelings too. So you got somebody who loves you, but also somebody who loves the church and is so sure that it's the thing, So what a tangled web we weave.
Yeah. I know we've connected on this point before, but your description of your dad offering you a beer, that's like one of those situations where, as a Mormon, you could very much say, well, he's trying to tempt me away from Satan, or Satan is acting through him, or there's some nefarious thing going on behind him offering me a beer. He's always trying to challenge my boundaries. He's trying to see if I'm... Or it could be like, I discovered with my own uncle in the funeral of my aunt that that is a way of connection that the world outside of Mormonism sees as very normal and usual, having a beer with a loved one. And it's something I didn't even understand. Right. And so I, as a Mormon, I never would have even understood that, or the power of that, or what the significance of that, because that was like a form of connection with my uncle that I never had growing up, because he was not a member of the church. And that I think just being open and being a little bit humble about what things may mean to other people is something I had to learn. And even reflecting back on how I interpret what my family members or other church members say to me, just realizing that things that they say that I can interpret as harmful, or with motive that is harmful, or effect that is harmful, if I understand, because I lived it myself, that their expressions have, they come from a completely different place, even though they don't even understand the harm that they're doing or that they potentially could do. It allows me to be more charitable toward them.
Yes, and I with not with my family because of my situation, but with many people that I've loved very much in church. A lot of my peers. I'm older. I'm a boomer, so a lot of people. I've seen damage done in the name of love, and they were doing it with their best intent of everything, but they were doing damage by saying, "Hey, you need to be doing this or that," kind of, the church way, kind of toe the line type thing. And I won't go into the story; it takes too long. But I've several of them actually. But you can do such great harm with love in your eyes and love in your heart. You absolutely can, because you believe it. Hey, can I run something by you?
Go ahead. I'm muting it right now because my dogs are going crazy.
All right, you want me to wrap it up? I'll wrap it up.
No. Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Okay. So I've been about 3 years. So I'm working on my triggers are getting better. I'm learning to process and everything. When something comes up that triggers me, makes my eye want to twitch, type thing. So, but one thing that I'm still working on is, and this is what I want kind of advice from you about this. I almost private messaged you about this a while back here. Oh, by the way, I have a message for evil apostate real quick as I go to this next part. You ready?
Okay.
John? Okay, no, I'm not going to say it. I have a message for you to pass to him. Tell him I feel like I'm in the old Casper cartoon. Remember the old Casper cartoons? Old pleasant little Casper's going along his way, and somebody sees him and they go, "I got a ghost." Remember that, Casper? You remember Casper? Come on, John.
Oh yeah. Oh no, I remember.
I remember. Okay, yeah. Well, tell evil apostate to go watch Casper, because I think I saw some ghosts going on. I'm just saying. Just pass that on to him. He'll know what I mean.
He still has unfinished business with you. I know what it is. Okay.
I know. Just tell him. Hey, listen. And here's what I say, because you're the master. By the way, and I'm curious, if you don't want to answer this, it's fine. Do your immediate family, like your kids and your loved ones, do they realize that what you do on YouTube actually helps people process and everything? Because you have a catalog of amazing stuff, on your channel. Do any of them realize? I'm just curious. Do they realize you're actually helping people, or do they just think, John, he's doing a thing,
No, I think it's more like, yeah. The puppet doesn't show up too much, but no, I think they're just like, well, yeah, he does stuff. I don't know what he does. My mom watches stuff occasionally, and I think it's helped her to understand my perspective a little bit more, and I think it's helped her realize that I'm not an evil apostate in the bad way.
And I asked because I've called him before, and I like you a lot. My code name for you, John, it was going to be the healer, and you're a doctor. You said that, plenty of times. But I think it's more the peacemaker. Like when you were talking to when your interview with the Midnight Mormons and stuff like that, you are very patient and everything like that, and you have that nature in what you do. You're also really really bright too. So a lot of the stuff you laid down has helped me personally process. And I'm sure, and I've heard other people talk, about you, and also, whatever their favorite podcast or whatever in this community, the ex-Mormon community is. Anyway, well, John, here's my problem and here's my trigger, and why I need advice. I've got some personal stuff in my life that's kind of slowing me down from my goal here, but I'm rolling forward and I'm working on it. But I'm wanted to actually step into the ring. But not as a critic or whatever. I would think of myself as a truth advocate, my own way. I have my own ideas and everything. But what really is just grinding my gears is when I see, I'm going to pick the Midnight Mormons, not picking on them. I think those guys are doing some pretty knucklehead stuff, but I like them. I mean, so it's not a backhanded compliment or anything. I'm not trying to attack them. I like those guys. I think they got potential, right? Like, hey, RFM was a former apologist. I mean, what are you going to do? But I like them, but they're just, I'm really having trouble connecting with a lot of the stuff they say because they're all over the map, says the guy who is all over the map himself. But, this, that, and the other, and with the debate with RFM, I mean, it's like when you're in these situations with people, like I said, you can't fight feelings, right? So some of the guys from Midnight Mormons, Jackson Washburn, who I also like very much. He is smart. He writes good, but it's like he kind of acknowledges there are problems, but he doesn't acknowledge them in what he's saying. I mean, it's just a confusing thing. A lot of the stuff that people, to me, just seems to be a lot of word salad and a lot of dancing around. Everybody wants to dance around on eggshells, and if you get ex-Mormon and Mormons together, in a conversation, and as you masterfully did in the Midnight Mormons, that was a perfect example of, whatever, building a bridge or trying to find whatever, some common ground, but still. How do you can't fight somebody's feelings. You can't effectively, change their minds or anything. You can just do what you can do. But a lot of the interviews I've seen, or even with if RFM and Bill Real interview someone, or in other case, John DeLynn, somebody who's a practicing Mormon, they say, hey, this is great. They're very wonderful. They hear them out. They may not agree. That's fine. They, hey, it was brave of them to come on, and it was, because, especially if you're a true believing Mormon, you've got a lot of pressure behind you. But I mean, how much of this is constructive? What gets into the constructive zone so when you can actually talk about it instead of dancing around every damn thing? You know what I mean? I mean, can we, there are problems with Joseph Smith, or there are problems with this or that. But what about what Nietzsche said? And what about philosophy? And, what? They're the ones who want to stay on track. And maybe it's just because I'm old. So I'm trying to, you know what I mean? How can you be effective? You can dance around and be polite all day, la-di-da, like the two chipmunks. After you, sir. Oh, no, after you. Oh, I insist. Remember those guys?
Yes.
Yeah, those little animated characters. Yeah, that's what we're doing. So how do you, I'm looking for, I've seen you do it masterfully. Like here, with your interview, let me ask you this. With your interview with the Midnight Mormons, what came out of that for you constructive on your end?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it is humanization of them. I think for me, part of my goal was I noticed a trend to dehumanize the people who are the vocal defenders of the church. And when we as a community dehumanize them, we enable ourselves to be more cruel and less charitable towards them. And we close our minds off to the points that they may make, which may cover blind spots that we have in our own biases. And so in order for me to be heard by them and for them to be heard by me, there needed to be a connection where we both saw each other as good people. And I couldn't do that if I didn't, look at what they said, listen to them, and try to consider carefully and seriously the points that they made, and that's where I hope even the first, punching down and smacking down and punching up podcast where Chris Hanna and I looked at some of the arguments that they were making, and then in our subsequent conversations, I hope that kind of came out a little bit. And I think even in the RFM debate, you still there are points that they made that are valid. And then there's stuff where it's just like kind of the typical apologetic, smoke and mirrors, or they just try to avoid issues by it.
Exactly.
And,
smoke and mirrors. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Lots of smoke and mirrors going on.
Yep. And the thing is that they probably would consider some of the stuff that we have to be smoke and mirrors. I think for me, the most poignant part of that debate was when Kwaku was trying to say, what does it mean to know something? Which was like a really good springboard to talk about the foundational difference that creates this divide. And RFM's response was, that's kind of boring. And the thing is, in the context of a structured debate where you're talking about subjects, it's not a good topic for the subject, but it would be a great topic to explore in a discussion where you have two people, very vocal, very articulate on both sides. And then there was another moment where they talk about how you're leading people out of the church, but then you're just leaving them to nihilism and secular nihilism. And what are you doing? There's a responsibility that you have when you leave that. And RFM's response is, well, I have no responsibility for people. I'm just pointing out the truth. And there's points to both of those sides, but it's a conversation worth having. And, it's a difficult one. And so I think that those blank spaces in the conversation are areas where we do actually need to explore and fill in with more discussion. And I think more people that come out of the church need to confront those questions and find some answers for them. And so that was kind of where I wanted to go with that. Now, it sounds like I'm trying to piece together from what you were saying that you have an inclination to enter the ring and maybe start a channel or a podcast or something like that, but you're not quite sure how to begin. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I've been working on it for a couple of years now, John. No, I've been blocking stuff out. No, I've got some stuff planned, but I just personally, on a personal level, and it will bleed over into anything I try to do, in that arena. It'll bleed over. I've been one for decades, literally, a true believing Mormon. I mean, I really believe wholeheartedly, so I get the feelings thing. I'm also very feelings oriented, but when I see people coming out with podcasts or essays or this or that and the other that have been featured in the ex-Mormon community and the different social media networks and stuff, and that's fine. I'm glad they're there. I'm glad they're speaking, but they just, to me, and this is a big trigger for me. It's one that I haven't been able to overcome yet. They just, a lot of smoke and mirrors, a lot of reframing this and that, a lot of omitting facts, big time omitting facts. I'm thinking of a couple of specific examples. I won't mention them, but they just omitting, proven. I mean, it's proven. I mean, if you step back from the big picture, which I know you like to do, hey, here's what happens in the Mormonism structure. Okay, here's what happens in the Jehovah's Witness structure. Here's how the Amish structure is, and they have surprising things in common. You know what I mean? They may have different doctrines or whatever, but they are controlling the people. They are using the family against them. Jehovah's Witnesses and Amish shun. Mormons don't shun, but sometimes they soft shun. But you still have, still have the pressure. So they're not that bad.
Well, I think if you're engaging in a conversation like that, having some degree of structure is helpful. So if you look at that smacking down and punching up conversation, we set out the Rappaport's rules of how we were going to interpret someone. And that was when we were doing a one-sided commentary where we would play something that they said and then try to respond while taking at face value the position of the interlocutor. And I think doing that in a live setting is also helpful if both sides are able to engage at that level and to kind of follow those rules, where even if somebody does do the obfuscation, or then you can talk about, well, let's talk about why you are interpreting something differently than I am, because maybe there's some legitimate reason that you interpret it differently than I do. And even if you come at the end of that conversation holding two different perspectives on the thing that you were talked about, at least you understand why they come to the conclusion that they do, even if you don't agree. And for honestly, a lot of those discussions, it's not about the discussion itself. It's about the reflection that happens after the discussion. And this is something that I think is true even of conflict with your family, is if you can engage civilly and not resort to ad hominem and not be bad, a lot of it, and don't try to win, like just try to understand and then be understood without feeling the need to win, then positions may change softly after the conversation when people can do so and save face. And it just may manifest itself incidentally in the future when you discover that they have a slightly different view or a slightly softened view. And so the thing that's the common element there is that there's a civil discussion that treats each side with some degree of dignity and doesn't immediately accuse the other of being disingenuous.
But then you do, well, you just said it. You treat each other with dignity and the whole thing, and everything's polite. And I guess you're talking about the world, kind of the realm of the debate rules or whatever. Somebody has to win. I did see the Chris Hanna. Listen, is Chris Hanna? Is he former Mormon or is he still currently active? He told me. I mean, I watched some of his videos. I don't remember. Was he? Yes
he's
or
former.
no?
He's former Mormon.
Well, I couldn't tell by his interviews. He's got some interesting things to say, and he kind of, goes around all over, and is a real, very interesting guy. He has the talent to, when conversation, they call it riffing, like on podcasts, you kind of, get on a roll and get it going. He's good at that. But I didn't have much substance, and I was trying to figure out whether he was former or not. And he also mentioned the debate between RFM and Midnight Mormons. And he says, I think the Midnight Mormons won and all this, and so they're talking about winning. Does anybody? I mean, does there have to be a winner? Can truth be the winner? I mean, it's like, and I know, what is truth? But I mean, we have facts. The Mormon structure is broken down everywhere you turn. It's just falling apart. As far as if you look into it, the history and what we were told versus the church narrative, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, and you guys talk about it all the time. I mean, you do as well, but nobody really wants to talk about it with any substance, in my opinion. I just haven't seen anything where somebody's, I don't know, do you have to convince somebody? I mean, it's like facts versus feelings in many cases too. I don't know. Do you understand what I mean? Am I making sense?
I mean, there's a great book called How to Have Impossible Conversations by Peter Bergen and James Lindsay. And they talk about this very question just in terms of setting your expectations for when and who to have a discussion with, and the nature of how you engage the discussion, how you push on areas that you think should be pushed on, and how you do the entire discussion in a way that is cautious of points where they may feel defensive on. And then just kind of getting to the root of why people believe the way that they believe without trying to condemn the belief itself, but just to foster insight into why somebody believes in something. And it's manifest itself in a semi-formal process called street epistemology. But the book itself is really valuable to look at. And that's where principles like allowing someone to save face and not having to win and not having to get a concession in the space of a conversation is really helpful. And it also talks about, the length of the conversation, because a lot of these things don't really need to be really long, drag out fights for a long period of time. And you may be setting yourself up for failure if that is the paradigm, the only paradigm that you're, going into and willing to accept. So I would just say, consider checking that book out, because it can give you some good ways to approach it. And
I will. No, I appreciate that. No, I will absolutely check that out. I think I've heard of it, but I haven't looked into it. And to me, what's important for people like you that are in social media and trying to help people, and like I said before, and I've told you in other times before, your stuff is, I enjoy. Your style and the way you're doing it, but you have legitimately helped me process and heal myself on my journey, as I continue out and continue to my life journey. So you're making a difference in the world, and that's what I would want to do. So I guess if you're debating and you got to win or lose or this or that, that's cool. But I feel like it's important to actually kind of make a connection with people in a way, if you can. And I think you absolutely do. You've made a connection with me, but with others, it's obvious. And so, other people, there's definitely a connection. So I guess if you can just keep that connection out there, because I don't think you're doing this for you. I think you're doing it to help people. And I think that it comes through. And last question, I'll leave you alone. But out of curiosity, if you don't mind, or maybe you want to think about it, how would you come up with the old mission statement, or a couple little bullet points about what is it you want to do with what is it you're doing with your channel? How do you view what you do? Because you're doing good. How do you view what you do? What's your mission with what you do?
I don't know. I've just kind of taken it as I started out wanting to just kind of explore things that would have been meaningful to me on the start of my journey. And then since then, it's really just been a conversation with what comes up, both in the public space, in Mormon events, and otherwise. And then I just kind of want to try to find perspectives that aren't talked about and try to understand what's going on and foster discussions that aren't being covered. If you ask, what needs to be talked about that we haven't talked about yet? And particularly, I think when I started out looking at how high demand groups and group psychology affect people in the way that they think, it kind of gave me a set of red flags. And so particularly, I think as I've looked at how, the journey that you go on after Mormonism and the different moral frameworks that you take on, and how that same group psychology starts to manifest in that, and how we're seeing it both in the ex-Mormon community and society as a whole. For me, that's a very important area to understand, because those mechanisms don't confine themselves to the walls of a church or a high demand religion. They exist. They're part of the human mind. And so if you go back and look at episodes like the Third Wave and the more recent stuff on the Cultural Revolution, a lot of that is kind of taking the things that we learn from religion and then seeing how it still exists outside of Mormonism, and how you still have to be alert for it and try to make sure you don't fall into some of those same dogmatic ways of looking at the world and looking at yourself, because they are out there. And in my mind, they're actually becoming more of a threat to the progress that we've made as a society than Mormonism represents as a threat to somebody. And I know that sounds like a big claim, but when you look, I think particularly at the Cultural Revolution of China, and you can realize how destructive some of these ways of thinking are when they get broadcast out to an entire society. And
by the way, I saw those videos you posted recently about the China thing. And I first thought, this is different for John. And I was watching it going, and then I got hooked. That happened in my lifetime, man. That happened in my lifetime. And that is pretty serious business. That's worth watching for anybody who hasn't seen it. Just listen to it.
Yeah, and there's more to come on that regard.
Yeah, that was really, you're doing good. John, listen, you're making a difference in the world. I appreciate you. I know others do. And I dub the peacemaker. So
all right, Gimpy, it's always great to hear from you, man.
Yeah, hey, thanks for talking to me. I sincerely appreciate it. All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye. All right. Well, we're going up on 2 hours. I should probably, let's see if there are any comments that we want to cover. I should probably wrap it up so that I can start barbecuing some chicken and get ready for supper here in a little bit here. Chris Hanna, the subject of some of those comments, definitely recommend that you check out his channel. He actually has his own breakdown of the Midnight Mormons and RFM debate that I think is actually really worthwhile listening to. You're going to hear about a lot of different terms that you may not be familiar with in terms of like standpoint epistemology and deconstruction and intersectionality, and terms that kind of get bandied about that I think it's important to start understanding how they're implemented. And Chris does a great job of kind of diving into that and seeing how some of those concepts are starting to infuse the discourse between Mormons and ex-Mormons. And so I'm excited to see what he comes out with in the future. And challengingly, it involves also kind of looking at some of the things that are said by a lot of the talking head Mormon figures, John DeLynn, RFM, John Larson, and seeing how some of these principles kind of make their way in there and what it means when you accept them. Because sometimes we accept some things into our vocabulary, into our lens of how we view the world, that we may not have explored fully what their implications are. So anyway, well, with that said, I think we will go ahead and close things down. We were hoping to get some stories about some of the conflict that happens in families around religion. This just tends to congregate around the holidays when everybody gets together, and there's a lot of pain and hurt out there. And if we can find ways to heal ourselves and to work on the things that we may be doing in our perceptions and in our actions that we have some control over in order to try to, foster the positive aspects of our relationships and still maintain boundaries and healthy distance when necessary so that we can work on ourselves. I think that is a great way for us to move forward, and examining the different ways that we can do that is great. So until next time, this has been Talk on Things and Stuff. Take care.